Assalamualaikum and good day everyone. My name is Aiman Afiq 267677 from BKAB3013 Group B. Okay, today my group will cover regarding our chapter 6, which is other type of fraud. So according to our syllabus, other type of fraud is there is a three main subtopic under the other type of fraud. The first one is fraud against organization. The second one is bankruptcy and divorce fraud. And the last one is fraud in e-commerce and computer-related fraud. So this is a little bit of about our group members that involved by me, Aiman, Nuraihan, Nur Izara Fiza, and lastly Fatin Nur Aina. So today, on my part, I only will cover about the fraud against organization. So what is fraud against organization? It refers to the occupational and abuse fraud or fraud committed by employees, customer, and vendor against organization. So these are occupational fraud more common and cause more financial loss to a business than fraud committed by third party. This is the fact that we need to consider. As employees will continue to work at the business, they will generally try to hide this fraud permanently, meaning that occupational fraud can be committed over an extended period of time. Fraud organization is divided into three main categories, which is asset misappropriation, corruption, and fraudulent or financial statement fraud. But on my topic today, I only will cover the two main categories, which is the asset misappropriation and corruption, since the last group already cover in terms of the fraudulent or financial statement. You can look back at the topic 5. So what is asset misappropriation? Generally, the employees, vendor, and customer have the potentially to commit and opportunities to stealing receipt in terms of cash and other assets. They can be employee alone or collusion with the others. In terms of the second one, in terms of the asset misappropriation, is they have the opportunities to stealing asset on hand, such cash, inventory, and other. It can be potentially the fraudster can be in terms of the employee alone or 2+ employee together. For the opportunities to commit the disbursement fraud, employee can be alone, vendor, or collusion between the employee and vendor. So I'd like to share with you what the occupational fraud classification scheme according to the Jessup Well. It divides the asset misappropriation into the two main areas, which is cash and inventory and other asset. In terms of the cash, the fraud can be done it can be done through the larceny, fraudulent disbursement, and the skimming. So larceny is referred to the intentionally taking away an employee cash without consent against will of the employer. Skimming is the removal of cash from victim entity prior to its entry in an accounting system. In terms of the inventory and other asset, the fraud can be done through the misuse or larceny. So I give you some illustration the way the cash can be taken from an organization. It can be taken when the cash is received or where cash is hanging around on hand, and it also can be taken when the cash is disbursed. So according to the Joseph Wells, the first one, the cash can be taken through the larceny. So what is the larceny? I give you an overview of the concept. In the occupational fraud setting, cash larceny may be defined as the intentionally taking away of an employee cash. The term of cash includes both currency and checks, without the consent and against the will of the employer. Skimming was defined above as the theft of book fund. cash return schemes, conversely, involve the theft of money that has already appeared on the victim company book. Therefore, cash return schemes are on-book fraud. So I highlight you the keywords from the cash larceny concept. The first one is cash is stolen by employees or either after the cash is recorded in the company accounting system. It's easier to detect compared to skimming scheme, can occur anytime in any circumstance since the employer has to access to cash. The most successful when they involve relatively small amount over an extended period of time. With such theft, business often write the small missing amount off as short or miscount rather than as a theft. So the second one of the theft of cash through the skimming skimming is the process by which cash is removed from entity before it enter the accounting system. So it is the most important we need to understand. It been removed by the employee or other person or other fraudster before it enter the system. This is an off-book scheme because the receipt of cash is never reported to the entity. When skimming takes place, often the cash of inventory will rise while the sales and receivable will decline or remain constant. Theft of cash through skimming is more complicated scheme occurred when the first one, in terms of the sales scheme, where it has been unrecorded or understated sale. Employee understated sale and collection by recording false or larger than reality sales discount. In terms of account receivable scheme, that fraudster kindly will write off or lapping or unconcealed receivable. So misappropriate customer payment and write off the receivable as collectible. Then it will embezzle a first customer payment and then credit that customer account when a second customer pay. A delayed recognition of payment known as lapping or work together with customer to allow them to pay later than require or less than require. So this is the illustration. The actual situation, the theft of cash through skimming can be happen. So how we can detect the larceny and skimming? The first one, that organization can analyze sales account by employee, or they can review journal entry for false credit to inventory to conceal unrecorded or understated sales. Then it can either write off of inventory for reason of loss, stolen or absolute product, write off of account receivable, or it can irregular entries to cash account. The third method to detect are compare the date of the payment customer is the date the payment are posted to the customer account. It can analyze cash receipt and their recording, or it can analyze the relationship between sales, cost of sales, and return or allowance. So see, this is other method how to detect. Actually, it based on the organization itself, whether this is or this is also the suggestion or recommended way to detect, but the most important is the way the effectiveness to detect the fraud to this type of fraud is actually depend on that organization, the structure, the internal control, and other method. So cash theft through fraudulent disbursement, it can divide into 6 main cash scheme. The first one is check tampering, which is the perpetrator physically prepare the fraudulent check. Second one is payroll, involve the ghost employee, falsified hours and salary, commission scheme, and false worker compensation claim. Cash register disbursement, false refund, and false void. Wire transfer scam designed to result the employer sending money using wire service under fraudulent or false pretenses. Criminal can defraud the victim by accessing the account information or by taking the identity. In terms of the expenses reimbursement, perpetrators produce false documented costs the victim company unknowingly make payment. In kind of the billing, perpetrator submit or alter an invoice that cause employer to willingly issue a check or make payment. So we look the example. For the billing, employer often create a shell company and bill employer for non-existent service, or employer purchase personal item, submit invoice to employer for payment. The example of the check tampering are the employee steal blank company checks, make them out to himself or an accomplice, then employee steal outgoing check to a vendor, deposit it into her own bank account. The example of the expenses reimbursement, such employee files fraudulent expenses report claiming personal travel, non-existent meal, and others matter. In terms of the payroll, employee claim overtime for hours not worked. Employee add goes employee to the payroll, but the fact is that the kind of payment will go into their own bank account. In terms of the wire transfer, employee fraudulently wires company money to a personal bank account. Or cash register reimbursement, employee fraudulently void a sale on his cash register and steal the cash. So we look the more further in terms of the type of disbursement scheme. The first one is the bidding scheme. So then I highlight the key area of characteristic of the bidding scheme. So the first one, the perpetrator does not have to undergo the risk of taking company cash or merchandise. The perpetrator submit or alter an invoice that causes his employer to willingly issue check or make payment. It's extremely common and quick expenses because it costs the organization to buy goods or service that are non-existent, overpriced, or not needed. Normally, it will attack purchasing function of an organization, will result in an illicit gain of cash, goods, or service for the fraudster. So, billing scheme can be divided into the three main types. I highlight this in the easier illustration. The first one is setting up dummy company or shell. The second one is altering or double paying a non-complice vendor statement. And lastly, the third type is the making personal purchase with company fund. So in terms of the setting up dummy company, the perpetrators will normally also will intentionally create a shell company to submit invoice to the victim organization. The perpetrators will normally also set up bank account in the new company name, listing himself as an authorized signer on the account. In terms of the altering or double paying, for example, perpetrator using this scheme may double pay an invoice by intentionally paying some bills twice and then requesting the receipt to return of the check. The perpetrator keeps the return check. In terms of the making personal purchase with company fund, employee run voucher for a personal purchase through the payable system. The perpetrators mispresent the nature of the purpose, claiming the goods or service being bought in the company behalf. For personal purchase good on the company credit or it can be purchased personal good on the company credit card or credit account. So how we can detect the billing scheme? The first one, the organization can investigate customer complaint, investigate unusual payees, perform site visit of vendor, perform computer analysis to search for vendor address that match company address. Unusual activity in soft account, increase payment to certain vendor, investigate noticeable change in employee lifestyle, or you can also conduct analytical review. So the move for the second type of the disbursement scheme, check tampering scheme. So what are the key characteristics of the check tampering scheme? The first one is more direct fraud because perpetrators physically prepare the fraudulent check. The key is that the perpetrator place false information on a company check, and that is this action enable the fraudster to illegally obtain fund from his employer. This type of fraudulent disbursement scheme whereby an employer either prepare the fraudulent check for his own benefit or intercept a check intended for a third party and convert the check to his own benefit. Instead of force support to general fraudulent disbursement, the perpetrators of a check tampering scheme takes physical control of a check and place false information on that instrument. The fraudster might forge a signature alter the payment of a check or forge an endorsement. So a major method of the check tampering scheme. The first one is forged maker scheme, forged endorsement scheme, alter check scheme, and lastly authorized maker scheme. So how we can detect? The first one we can investigate customer complaint, review cancel check image, investigate past due notice received by the entity, and they also review unusual endorsement of check. So this is the other method of how we can detect the check tampering. So move on the third type of the expenses reimbursement, which is referred to the expenses reimbursement. So the key area is the perpetrator produce false document that cause victim organization to unknowingly make a fraudulent disbursement. The most commonly perpetrated by sales personnel who overstate or create fictitious expenses in such area as client entertainment and business travel. Outside salesperson are not the only employees who commit this type of fraud. The travel and expenses budget are in common target for occupational fraud. Employees may falsify information about their business expenses and cause their employer to overcompensate them in the form of inflated expenses reimbursement. Any person who is in a position to incur travel or business entertainment expenses is potentially capable of committing this expenses reimbursement fraud. So, expenses reimbursement scheme fall into four main categories, which is the mischaracterized, overstated, submitting fictitious expenses, and submitting the multiple of or duplicate reimbursement. So how we can detect it? The first one, we can compare the actual and budgeted expenses by cost center, or we can investigate reimbursement over a certain amount or in the event amount, investigate reimbursement charged to unusual account, and we also can examine accounts that have unusual activity, such as high reimbursement at the end of the period. So the next one type of disbursement scheme, payroll disbursement scheme. So the key area that we need to understand are the first one, they occur when an employee fraudulently generates overcompensation on his behalf. Generally occurred when the fraudster falsifies payroll record, timekeeping record, or some other document concerned with the payroll function. It's similar to a billing scheme in that the perpetrators generally produce some false document or otherwise make a payment claim for a distribution of fund by his employer. It divides into four major categories, which is for that we will look more deeply in the next slide, which is for the first one. The category is ghost employee, falsified hours and salary, commission scheme, and false worker compensation claim. So what is we will look on the category of payroll scheme. For the first one is ghost employee. It tends to generate the largest loss because it involves putting someone on the payroll or keeping former employee on the payroll who does not actually work for a victim company. Through the falsification of personal or payroll record, fraud perpetrators cause paycheck to be generated to a ghost. These paychecks are then cashed by a fraud perpetrators or their accomplice. So they have four things must be happen in order for ghost employee to be worked, which is the first one. The ghost must be added to the payroll. The second one, timekeeping and wage rate information must be collected. A paycheck must be issued to a ghost unless direct deposit are used. The check must be delivered to a perpetrators or an accomplice. In terms of the second category, falsified hours and salary, for hourly employer, the size of a paycheck is based on two essential factors, which is the first one, the number of hour works and rate of pay. In terms of the number of hour work, it exposes the risk of fraud through increase the size of a paycheck, or he or she must either falsify the number of hours work or change the wage rate. For the rate of pay, it exposes the fraudulent risk of employee might increasing the rate of pay. In terms of the commission scheme, an employee and on commission can fraudulently increase his or her pay by the first one, falsifying the amount of sales made through the three ways. The first, creating fictitious sales, falsifying the value of sale made by altering price listed on sales document, or you can overstating sales by claiming sale made by another employee or in another period. And also it can also increase the rate of commission. So how we can detect the payroll scheme? The first one, independent payroll distribution. The second one is analyze of pay address or account, search for duplicate government identification number, review of overtime, analysis of deduction, investigation of other employees' complaint. So in terms of the wire transfer fraud refers to a scenario in which a fraudster defraud or obtain money based on false representation. The method comprise involve malware, social engineering, phishing or smishing, or an email compromise. So what is a phishing? Phishing refers to the scenario in which an individual sends an email pretending to be someone they are not in order to obtain information from target of the attack. Commonly involve the recipient clicking on link contained within the email and enter their password, after which the fraudster is able to gain sufficient information to obtain to the victim account or mailbox. So a point of compromise involve online, mobile, call center, customer, and bank employee. The method of wire imitation involve branch, email, online, call center, fax, and bank of the employee. So I give you the example regarding the wire transfer disbursement scheme. Sample 1. The first one, they refer to the targeting employee to gain inside access to the wire system. Using a spear phishing scheme, malware designed to compromise the back-end payment system is installed on the bank employee computer. The malware takes over the victim computer, enabling the fraudster to submit a large dollar transfer into the wire system. This clearly is a more sophisticated attack, but the ability to steal a large amount of money makes it worth the effort to the fraudster. The second sample illustration refers to the fake vendor invoice, where the fraudster mock up a fake invoice from a known vendor and submit it to a company for payment with fraudulent payment instruction, especially when the vendor being spoofed has a long-term relationship and is known to submit regular invoice. The victimized company often doesn't review it quite as closely. This is often occurred, but submit it to the bank for payment. Fraudster will also use this scam to attack many companies simultaneously with the same invoice template, pretending to be a supplier used by a lot of different companies, such as the phone company or the electric utility. So how to detect? The first one, we use the behavior-based wire fraud prevention. It can automatically monitor the activity. This is such as the system that built to prevent wire fraud. So behavior-based wire fraud prevention will automatically monitor the activity of every originator and beneficiary of every wire transaction. Also create continually update model of individual behavior, compare new wire to establish norm for that particular originator. And also easy to set up and don't quick rules or maintain it because the behavior drive the model. So the last one, type of disbursement scheme, refer to the cash register disbursement. So this is among the least costly of all disbursement schemes. The basic fraudulent scheme are false refund and false void. Fraudulent refund and void represent a class of occupational fraud that is a hybrid between cash theft and fraudulent disbursement. In practice, an employee physically removes cash from his cash register and absconds with it. In the respect, such schemes are very similar to a cash larceny scheme. So what is false refund? A fraud perpetrator processes a transaction as if a customer were returning merchandise even though there is no actual return. The fraudster takes money from the cash register in the amount of the false return. Since the register tape shows that a merchandise return has been made, it appears that the disbursement is legitimate. In terms of the false void, fictitious void are similar to refund scheme in that they generate disbursement from the cash register. When a sales is void on the register, a copy of the customer receipt is usually attached to a void slip along with the signature or initial of a manager that indicate the transaction has been approved. The process of false void, the cashier usually keep the customer receipt at the time of sale and then ring in a voided sale after customer left. So how we can detect it? The first one, we can accounting for consecutive sale, order and cash register transaction, or we also can comparing the volume of credit card issued by period. Accounting for missing a register tape and also investigating void transaction not properly documented. Okay, now we will move to the second part of the theft on inventory and asset. So in terms of the non-cash scheme, it can be through the misuse or borrow of inventory and all other assets such as company vehicle, supplies, security information, and office equipment. Or it also can be done through the larceny or theft inventory and all other assets. So what is the misuse? What is the misuse of inventory and all other assets? How many times have we heard someone say, "I just going to borrow this," or "I took it home to work on the project over the weekend"? In fact, a great deal of inventory is stored under the pretense that it's being borrowed. Eventually, the inventory is being converted to personal use. Some employees might use company asset to do personal work on the side that can lead to productivity issue. Even if the assets are not stolen, they are exposed to additional wear and tear that decrease their value. So, in terms of the misuse of inventory and all other assets, it can be done through the three main types of fraud involve the inventory, information, and security. For example, inventory non-cash fraud scheme or employees steal inventory from the warehouse. Employee use company equipment for personal business. In terms of information, employee sell research to competitors. Employee provide the trade secret to competitors' organization. In terms of the security, employee fraudulently steal company bond. Then a company also can fraudulently steal stock option from the organization. So through the theft of inventory and all other assets, the most inventory fraud scheme involves misappropriating inventory for personal use, stealing inventory and scrap, or changing embezzlement to inventory. Inventory is an asset that can be stolen by employee to sell to third party. There are many ways to convert stolen inventory into cash. One method involves selling in inventory to employee personal business, at flea market, or at garage sale to unknowing purchase or co-conspirators. So about thief of inventory and all other asset can be done through fixed asset. Another common scheme is unauthorized personal use of fixed asset by employee. So how we can detect non-cash asset scheme? The first one, perform physical count of fixed asset. So this is the most effective because perform physical count of fixed asset, including computer software. Then we can analyze depreciation schedule for unusual pattern or compare fixed asset purchase for multiple years. So now we will look at the corruption, the second part of the occupational organization. So what is the corruption? Corruption is the wrongful use of influence in the business dealing to procure business for the actor or another person. Contrary to the duty or the right of others, corruption occurs in various forms including bribery, kickback, illegal gratuities, economic extortion, collusion, and conflict of interest. The recipient of this scheme range from a low-level clerk to a chief executive officer or public official. Corrupt payment may be in the form of food and liquor or large cash payment. Whatever the situation, corruption creates an unhealthy situation for the business actually. So corruption scheme fall into four main category. The first one, conflict of interest, bribery and kickback, illegal gratuities, and economic extortion. We will look further on the first one, conflict of interest. So, what is conflict of interest? Conflict of interest occurred when an employee has an undisclosed personal or economic interest in the transaction. It usually involves sales dealing by an employee. This scheme involves sales dealing by employee include an agent taking an interest in a transaction that is actually or potentially adverse to the interest of the principal or without disclosure to the principal. To be disclosed as a conflict of interest, the employee interest in the transaction must be undisclosed. The essential layman, the employee take advantage against the employer. So the conflict of interest falls into two main categories. The first one is purchase scheme and sales scheme. So for the bribery and kickback, it occurred in the form of payment, gift or gratuities to employee from a contractor or vendor. They are classified as corruption scheme because they involve collusion between employees and vendor. This scheme usually involves the purchasing function of the victim company. Since purchasing employee frequently have direct contact with vendor and therefore it have the opportunity to establish a collusive relationship. Bribery can be defined as the offering, giving, receiving, or soliciting of anything of value to influence an official act or business decision. Kickback are the giving or receiving the anything of value to influence a business decision without the employer knowledge and consent. In sense, the victim company is being attacked from two directions. So this I already mentioned in previous slide. In terms of the illegal gratuities, it refers to the something of value given to an employee to reward a decision after it has been made, rather than influence it before the decision is made. This crime is similar to bribery, except an illegal gratuity does not require proof or intends to influence the employee decision. Instead of paying employee to make decisions such as award a contract, the vendor pays the employee because of a decision the employees previously made. Illegal gratuities are merely offered as a thank you for something that has been done. In providing an illegal gratuity, there is no need to show that the vendor is intended to influence the employee's action. It is enough to show that the employee accepted an award based on his performance. So this is the overview of the illegal gratuities. In terms of the economic extortion occurred when an employee or official, through the wrongful use of actual or threatened force or fear, demands money or some other consideration to refrain from discriminating against a business decision. Economic extortion is the opposite of bribery. Instead of a vendor offering payment to an employee to influence his business decision, the employee demands that the vendor pay him for favorable treatment or to avoid unfavorable treatment. So how the method of making illegal gratuity? It can be in terms of the gift, travel, entertainment, cash payment, check, and other financial instrument, hidden interest, and also other method. So that's all for the occupational organization. Now I will look.
Okay, I am Nur Izara Fiza binti Zulkafli. I will continue with bankruptcy, divorce, and tax fraud. For the overview of tax, divorce, and bankruptcy fraud, fraud is common in bankruptcies, divorces, and tax payment because in all three situations, assets are being taken away from someone or some organization and given to someone else. To keep assets from being taken, individuals often attempt to fraudulently hide or transfer assets so that those assets remain unknown or cannot be discovered. For the fraud examiner's roles in bankruptcy and divorce cases, CPAs and other fraud examiners can play an important role in both investigating and testifying in bankruptcy and divorce fraud cases and in testifying in tax fraud cases. The Malaysian Inland Revenue Board has a framework for tax investigation, including those associated with fraud. Okay, this is the examples of roles. First is serve as an examiner or a trustee in bankruptcy cases. Second is serve on creditors committees or represent creditors committees by investigating the debtors' financial affairs and preparing investigation reports in bankruptcy cases. 3 is assist the courts by preparing detailed reports of investigation findings in bankruptcy cases. 4th is assist in recovering assets for creditors in both divorce and bankruptcy cases. And lastly is serve as private investigators to find hidden assets or examine lifestyle of divorce or bankruptcy participants. Okay, this is the types of bankruptcy and divorce fraud. First is bankruptcy or divorce resulting from fraud. Second is bankruptcy and divorce used to perpetrate fraud. And third is bankruptcy and divorce used to conceal fraud. Okay, next I will talk about tax fraud. Tax fraud can be committed against any organization that collects taxes, including the federal government, state governments, local governments, or other taxing authorities. If the IRB suspects that an individual or entity is underpaying its taxes, the individuals or entities can return will be audited by an IRB tax compliance auditor. If the audit reveals that taxes were underpaid, the auditor can either assess civil fines and penalties. Okay, second is divorce fraud. Okay, the party attempting to prove divorce fraud must prove all 3 of the following. First is a false representation, usually one of fact was made by the other party. Second is the defendant that knowledge or belief that the representation was false or made the representation with reckless indifference to the truth. And third is the defendant had intent to induce the plaintiff to act or refrain from acting in a certain way. Okay, most of divorce fraud litigation results from one of 2 allegations. First is the plaintiff's spouse claims that the defendant hid assets so they would not have to be shared or taken away. And second, the values assigned to assets were unrealistically low, thus resulting in an unfair divorce settlement. Okay, this is the participants that participate in divorce cases. First is the marital partners, second is attorneys for both sides, and third is a divorce court. Okay, third is bankruptcy fraud. Bankruptcy fraud is the most common fraud scheme utilized in fraudulent bankruptcy filings like divorce involves the concealment of a debtor's assets. Concealment prevents these assets from being liquidated and transferred to creditors to extinguish debts. This is two types of bankruptcy fraud scheme. First is the planned bankruptcy, or can we call burst out, and second is the fraudulent concealment of assets during or in contemplation of a bankruptcy. Okay, first, burst out. A burst out may take several forms, but essentially involves intentionally obtain loans or purchase inventory on a credit basis and concealing or absconding with the proceeds from the loan or sale of the inventory or with the inventory itself before creditors are paid. Insolvency is declared and bankruptcy is filed, but the creditors find no asset left from which they can be paid. If the scam works, the perpetrators retain the cash proceeds but escape liability for the unpaid debt. This is two types of burst out. The fraud perpetrators set up a new company and operate it legitimately for a while in order to establish credibility and credit with banks or suppliers. And second, the perpetrators quietly buy an established company that already has a good reputation and credit rating and take over its management, which is concealed fraud. Okay, next is the indicators of a burst out. First is a company's only listed address and phone number are a post office box and an answering service. Second, a new company is owned and managed by persons from another state or is vague about its ownership or type of business. Third is a sudden change is made in a company's management, especially if the change is made without public notice. Fourth is credit references either cannot be verified or seem too eager to provide favorable references. Fifth, if the size of order placed on credit and the credit balances with suppliers suddenly and dramatically increase. Six is the inventory is suddenly delayed without explanation. And lastly, customers have a history of buying goods at unreasonable discounts. Okay, next is about the fraudulent concealment of asset or income in bankruptcies or divorces. Okay, the means of concealing assets or income. First, the meaning is the cash received in payment of receivable may be diverted to another entity, usually a related party. The inventory may be shipped to an off-site location or sold to a related party or co-conspirator at a steeply discounted price. Assets or income may be shifted to another entity controlled by the debtor or the divorced party, and sales may not be reported in the debtor company's book. And payments may be made to fictitious individuals or vendors and the amount diverted to the debtor or to a divorced party. Income from control organization may be intentionally understated by overstating expenses, and the debtor's personal expenses may be paid by the company and mischaracterized as business expenses. The debtors or divorce partner books and records or other financial information may be damaged or hidden, and interest in partnership, corporation, lawsuit proceeds, or the asset may not be disclosed. Okay, next, the indicators of concealment. Okay, first is transfers of property or large payments to related parties or individuals such as insiders, shareholders, or relatives. Second is frequent and unusual transfers between bank accounts, particularly between business and personal accounts. Third is numerous transactions made in cash that normally are made on account. Fourth is unusual, large, and unexplainable payments to vendors. Fifth is unusual or rapid reductions in assets. Six is increase in operating losses that are not explained by economic factors. Seven, inconsistencies between financial statement or tax return and the official forms filed for the bankruptcies or records filed in divorce cases. Eighth is travel to offshore tax havens or locations that allow secret bank account. And lastly, missing, inaccurate, or damaged records. Okay, next, we talk about the civil liability for false accusations. Fraud investigators should always have evidence supporting claims of alleged fraud. Without supporting evidence, charges of false accusation could result in civil liability against a fraud investigator. This is especially true in cases involving bankruptcies and divorce fraud. Okay, next is money laundering. Okay, what is money laundering? Money laundering is a process of concealing illegal source, application of income derived from criminal or illegitimate activities, and a subsequent distinguishing of the source of that income to make it appear legitimate. Okay, this is the money laundering process. There is 3 stages. First is placement. Okay, placement involves physically placing illegal obtained money into the financial system or the retail economy. Dirt money is most vulnerable to detection and seizure during placement. Okay, second is layering. Layering is the separation of illegally obtained money from its source through a series of financial transactions that makes it difficult to trace the origin. During the layering phase of money laundering, criminals often take advantage of legitimate financial mechanisms in attempts to hide the source of the fund. And the third stages is integration. Integration means converting the illicit funds into a seemingly legitimate form. Integration may include the purchase of businesses, automobiles, real estate, and other assets. Okay, that's all from me. Thank you.
Okay, next we will continue with the consumer fraud. Consumer fraud is any fraud that targets individuals as victims. As a consumer, you should never give your personal information, such as credit card or driver license number, to someone who contact you. It is probably okay to provide personal information when you initiate the call or transaction, but even then, you should exercise extreme care. Armed with your personal information, fraudsters pretending to be you can ruin your credit, obligate you for large debts, and create tremendous headache for you as you try to convince law enforcement and others that it really wasn't you who entered into the transactions. Basically, there are many types of consumer fraud. However, there are two primary types of consumer fraud that we will discuss further. The first one is identity theft, which refer to the most common type of consumer fraud that will affect thousands of people every day. The second one is consumer scam, which refer to the fraudster that they will use various schemes to earn consumers' confidence, and then they use that confidence to get the consumer to pay or invest money or to provide any personal information. Consumer fraud is a very serious problem in the world. The United States Federal Trade Commission released a statistical survey in April 2013. Over 25 million adults, they are 10.8% of the adult populations, were victims of fraud during 2011. There are 17% of African Americans that be the victims of the consumer frauds. Next, there are 13.4% of Hispanic were victims, and the rate of 9% of non-Hispanic whites were the victims of consumer fraud. This is the numbers of victims in the top 5 consumer frauds. The first one refer to the fraudulent weight loss products that promise to allow one to lose weight without diet or any exercise, but then did not deliver on the promises. This fraud estimated to affect over 5.1 million Americans in 2011. The second one is referred to the price promotion, with estimate 2.4 million victims. This fraud involved consumers who paid something or attend a presentation to receive a promised price, but then, when delivered, that was not as promised. The third one were the billings for buyers club memberships and for internet service, each with an estimated 1.9 million victims who were billed for this service without any authorizing for the billing. Last but not least, it refers to the work at home programs and business opportunities that generally fail to deliver at least one half of the promised level of earnings. Next, we will move to the identity theft. Identity theft is used to describe those circumstances when someone uses another person's name, address, social security number, bank or credit card account number, or other identifying information to commit fraud or other types of crimes. As we can see here, this is the identity theft cycle. So basically, there are three stages of this identity theft cycle. Stage 1 refers to the discovery, the second stage refers to the action, and the last one is trial. Perpetrators of identity theft will follow a common pattern after they have stolen a victim's identity. So by having this identity theft cycle, this will help us to understand more on the process of identity theft occurs. The first stage refers to the discovery, which will involve two phases. The first one is gaining information phase, where the fraudster will do all they can to gather a victim's information. Example of discovery techniques include such information gathering technique as searching trash, stealing mail, phishing, and scanning credit card information. The next phase refers to the information verification phase, where the fraudsters will use various means to verify the information that they already have. The fraudster will do telephone scam, where the perpetrators call the victims and act as a representative of a business to verify the information that they already have. And they will also do the trash searches when another means was used to gather the original information. The action stage is the second phase of the identity theft cycles. It involves two activities, which are accumulating documentations and devising cover-up or concealment actions. Accumulating documentations refer to the process when perpetrators use to obtain needed tools to defraud the victims. For example, using the information they already obtained, perpetrators may apply for a bogus credit card, fake checks, or driver license in the victim's name. The second activities are cover-up or concealment actions, which involve any steps that are taken to hide or cover the financial footprints that are left through the identity theft process. For example, in this stage, a fraudster might change the physical address or email of the victim so that the credit card statements are sent by the financial institution to the perpetrators rather than the victims. The last stage refers to the trial stage, which involves those activities of the identity theft that provide perpetrators with financial benefits. There are three phases of the trial stage: first dimensional actions, second dimensional actions, and third dimensional actions. The first dimensional actions are the first frauds committed mostly to test the effectiveness of fraud schemes and the stolen information. For example, like a fraudster might go to a gas station and use a stolen credit card to determine if the card really works. If the card works, the fraudster gains confidence in the theft and move to the bigger scam. However, if the card does not work, the fraudster faces no immediate threat of consequences and can quickly discard the card without any consequences. The second dimensional actions are actions taken by a fraudster once initial trials have been successful. These actions often involve face-to-face interactions with others. For example, if the card used at the gas station was successful, the fraudster may try using it to purchase bigger items. The perpetrators may go to a mall and buy clothing, stereo equipment, or other large ticket items. The third dimensional actions are those actions that provide significant benefit to the perpetrator and occur after the perpetrator has considerable confidence in identity theft. For example, a fraudster may establish auto loan or engage in other significant transactions. Next, we will see on how fraudsters convert personal information to financial gain. Once fraudsters have accessed personal information, they will use the information to their financial benefit. So some of the common purchases may be identity theft perpetrators are as follows. So the first one, the perpetrators may buy large ticket items such as computer, television. So by using this fake credit or debit card, a fraudster will often buy items that are quite expensive, and also this item can easily be sold. The next one is the perpetrators may take out car, home or other loans. This is when the fraudster has the confidence that the identity theft is working. So he or she often takes out a loans using the victim's identity. So basically the most common types of fraudulent loan is for the hire purchase for the automobile. This is because automobile can easily be traced using the license plates or vehicle identification number. So the car is usually quickly sold so that it cannot be traced by the fraudsters. The next one is the perpetrators may establish phone or wireless service by using the victim's name. So fraudsters often set up a phone or wireless service in the victim's name. This is done so that the perpetrators can more easily convince bank, business and other that he or she is the person that he claimed to be. So fraudsters also use telephone as a form of communication to buy or sell drugs, and also to gain information to steal more identities, okay, begins telemarketing schemes or support other fraud schemes. Next, perpetrators may using counterfeit checks or debit card. So by using debit card or counterfeit checks, fraudsters often drain victims' bank account. So one of the biggest risks of debit card is their lack of insurance to cover the fraudulent transactions. So this makes it extremely important that consumers only have reasonable amount of cash in their checking or debit account. That way, if a fraudster drain a victim's checking account, the loss will be minimal. Next, the perpetrators may open a new bank account. So fraudster will often use victims' personal information to open a new bank account, and they will write the checks that will not only cause problems such as non-sufficient fund, but also in the process they will destroy the person's name and credit. Next, the perpetrators may filing for bankruptcy under the victim's name. Fraudsters sometimes file for bankruptcy under a victim's name. Such filing keeps victims from not knowing that their identity has been stolen. In the process, the victim's credit report and reputation are damaged, a problem that will take many years to repair it. Next, the perpetrators may report the victim's name to the police. This because fraudsters have been known to use the victim's name and identity to keep their own record from being blemished. Furthermore, if a perpetrator has a criminal record, he or she might use a victim's name to purchase gun or other difficult to obtain items. Next, the fraudsters may open new credit card account. So by using this will enable the fraudster to spend money in a victim's name with no immediate consequences. This is one of the easiest way for the perpetrators to defraud a victim once his or her identity has been stolen. Okay, and the last one, the perpetrators may change the victim mailing's address. The fraudsters often change the mailing address on a victim's credit card account. This is to prevent the victim from knowing that there are a problem and enables the fraudster to continue using the credit card and identity. Stealing a victim's identity is not as difficult as it may be seen. Fraudster can obtain the information required to commit identity theft in several ways. The United States Department of Justice website lists some of the following methods as common ways for one identity to be stolen. The first one refer to the shoulder surfing, where the fraudster watch or listen to someone enter a credit card number. The second one is dumpster diving, when the fraudster rummaged through consumer trash. Once a garbage container is in the street, it is considered public property and anyone can rummage through it. Pre-approved credit card application, tax information, receipts containing credit card numbers, social security receipt or financial record are valuable sources of information for the identity thieves. The next one is skimming. Skimming is a process where fraudsters use an information storage device to gain access to valuable information when a credit card is processed. Next, the perpetrators may gather information from business. Perpetrators will steal information from their employer, hacking into organizations' computers, or bribing an employee who has access to confidential records. Next, the perpetrators may steal the wallets or purse to gain confidential information or identifications. This is because valuable information is contained in almost every wallet. The other ways is the perpetrators may sneak into a victim's home and steal the information. And they also will stealing mail including bank information, checks, credit card information, tax information or pre-approved credit cards. Last but not least, the perpetrators may use phishing, which by using the internet to steal important information. So this often occurs by phishing, high-tech scams that use spams or pop-up messages to deceive consumers into disclosing credit card number, bank account information, password or other sensitive information. Phishers, who is a fraud perpetrators who using phishing, they will send email or pop-up messages claiming to be from legitimate business or organization that consumer deal with. For example, like internet service provider, banks, online payment services. So this message will usually say that the victim need to update or validate his own account. So this message then direct the victims to a website that looks like a legitimate website. The purpose of this site is to trick the victim into divulging personal information. So there are many ways to minimize the identity theft risk. The first one is they can guide your mail from theft. So this happened in United States when a person is away from home, they can use the service by United States Postal Service to hold their personal mail. The second one is opt out of pre-approved credit cards. One common and easy way for a fraudster to commit identity theft is to simply fill out the pre-approved credit card application consumers receive via the mail and send them in. The third one is check the personal credit information at least annually. The credit card report includes information on where the person lives, how the person pay the bills, and whether the person have been sued, arrested, or filed for bankruptcy. Next is by protect the social security card. So an individual social security card is valuable information for any fraudster. With knowledge of someone's SSN, fraudster can open all types of new accounts in the victim's name. Therefore, consumers should always keep their SSN in a safe place. The next ways to minimize the risk is safeguard personal information. Safeguarding personal information is very important for every individual. Consumers who have roommates employed outside help to clean or perform other domestic services or have outside people in their house for any reason need to be particularly careful. The next one is guard trash from theft. Consumers need to tear or shred receipt, insurance information, credit applications, doctor bills, checks and bank statements, old credit cards, and any credits offer they receive in the mail, as well as any other source of personal information. The other ways is protect wallet and other valuable. Consumers should carry their wallet in their front pocket and never leave it in their car or any place where it can be stolen. It is important for consumers to always be aware of where their wallet is and what the content are. Individuals should only carry identification information and credit and debit cards that are regularly used in their wallet. Besides that, consumers should limit themselves to only 2 or 3 credit cards and keep the 24-hour emergency telephone number of all credit cards they possess in their cell phone's address books. Another way is to use the strong password. Individuals should use passwords on credit card, bank and telephone account that are not easily determinable or available. Consumers should avoid using information that can be easily associated with them, such as their birthday, their mother's maiden name, their spouse name, and the last 4 digits of their telephone number. Last but not least, the individuals need to protect their homes and computers. So consumers should protect their house from fraud perpetrators. This is because some frauds have been known to break into a home and not steal a single physical object. The victims may not even know someone has been inside their home. This is because the perpetrator will steal all information that is needed to easily commit identity theft and then leave. In terms of computer, remember that legitimate companies rarely ask for confidential information via email. If an individual has questions about his or her account, the person should call the company using a phone number he or she knows is legitimate. If consumers get an email or pop-up message that asks for personal or financial information, they should not reply or click on the link in the message. Next is prosecutions of identity theft. When people commit identity theft, they can now be prosecuted criminally or civilly. To succeed in the prosecution, it is usually necessary to show that the perpetrator acted with the intent to defraud the victim. This is best accomplished by gathering appropriate evidence matter. Appropriate evidence matter consists of the underlying data and all corroborating information available. So this process will usually easy to prove if the evidence of the fake identity used to purchase an items, open an account, or obtain a credit card is collected. Next, if the person is facing with the identity theft occurs, so the victims should take action to minimize the identity theft. What the victim should do is they can contact the Federal Trade Commissions, contact local FBI or US Secret Service Agency, contact the local postal inspection service, contact the Internal Revenue Service, contact the Social Security Administrations, contact the Credit Reporting Agency, contact personal financial institutions and change their personal identification information. Next, we will discuss on the second primary types of consumer frauds, which is other types of consumers and investment scams. The first type of scam is foreign advance fee scam. Foreign advance fee scams have been around for years. However, with the advance of the internet, they have recently become much more widespread and common. Unfortunately, many individuals have become victims to this form of consumer fraud. Nigerian money offers is one of the foreign advance fee scam where individuals from Nigeria or another country contacts victims through email, fax or develop telephones and offer the victims millions of dollars. The catch is that in order to transfer the victim these monies, it is necessary to provide name and bank account numbers. It is include routing numbers and so on, so the money can be transferred. The fraudster then use this information to drain the victim's account and commit other types of frauds. Another foreign advance fee scam is a clearinghouse scam. A clearinghouse scam involves a victim receiving a letter that falsely claims that the writer represents a foreign bank. This foreign bank is supposedly acting as a clearinghouse for venture capital in a certain country. The fraudulent company will try to get victims to invest in the foreign venture capital companies for high return. This is to give the impression that they are legitimate. The, per- the perpetrators will set up bank accounts in the United States. When the victims transfer money into the domestic account, the perpetrators quickly transfer the money overseas where it will be never seen again. Another types of foreign advance fee scam is the purchase real estate scheme. This scam usually takes the form of someone trying to sell a piece of real estate or other property to the victim. Perpetrators will see advertisement for land being sold and then send possible victim letters offering to purchase the property on behalf of a foreign concern. The victims are defrauded when they agree to pay upfront fees to a special broker. Once paid, the victim will never hear from the perpetrator again. Next is sale of crude oil at below market price. In this scam, the victims receive an offer to purchase crude oil at a price well below market price. However, in order to receive this below market price, it is necessary to pay special registrations and license fees. Once the victim pays these fees, the sellers will disappear. Finally, the disbursement of money from will is a foreign advance fee scam that is becoming ever more popular. In this scam, perpetrators send a letter from a mysterious benefactor interested in contributing a large sum of money. However, to get the money, the recipient is required to pay inheritance taxes or government fees. Once these tax and fees are paid, the victims are unable to contact the benefactor. So basically, all of these schemes have common elements. They all come from an unknown party who claims that they have access to large sum of money or asset. The perpetrators are always willing to transfer that money or other asset to the victims, but only after the money or information is obtained from the victims. The perpetrators are not well-known business and there is usually some urgency to participate. The second types of scam is work at home schemes. So work at home scheme is divided by three, which are multi-level marketing, pyramid scheme, chain letter, mail stuffing, product testing, and craft assembly. For the multi-level marketing, refer to the individual who are independent distributor of a legitimate business. So in order to increase the distributor process, representative of this organization will recruit friends, family members and others to join them in selling the product. Generally, distributors make money both on what they sell personally and on the sale of those they recruited. So one of the most common work at home scheme is the fraudulent manipulations of legitimate multi-level marketing organizations. While there are many variations of fraudulent MLM, one kind of fraudulent multi-level marketing organizations is also called as a pyramids or Ponzi schemes. These schemes refer to the instead of selling real legitimate products, they have only illusionary products and profit. Ponzi schemes tend to focus their efforts on recruiting of new members instead of selling legitimate products. In the beginning of a pyramid scheme, the investment of subsequent investors are used to pay promised returns to earlier investors. This seems real returns exceed early investors who then spread the good news about the investment to their friends and relations. Sooner or later, however, the scheme either becomes too big and too exposed, and as a result, subsequent investors dry up, or the perpetrators disappears with the asset. With no new money to make the scheme look like it is working, the entire organization usually collapses, leaving only a few people at the top of the pyramid that have actually made money. Those who at the bottom will always lose their investment. The next one is chain letter scam that usually begin with a gullible consumers that sees an advertisement stating something like by looking at the charts and see the person will automatically receive thousands of dollars in return. However, the only people who benefit from change later are the mysterious few at the top of the chain who constantly change name, address, and post office box. Next, mail stuffing is a scam where the consumer responds to an advertisement that promises income simply for stuffing envelopes. When answering such advertisement, consumers don't receive envelope for stuffing, but instead get promotional material asking for cash in exchange for details on money-making plans. The system feeds on continuous recruitment of people to offer the same plan. There are several variations on this type of scheme, all of which require the customer to spend money on advertising and material. Product testing is a fraud that typically begins when consumers receive brochures featuring different products. The product usually requests that consumer review the product presented and send their commentaries to the supplier for review. The brochure promised that the participant, in addition to payments for services rendered, will be able to keep the products reviewed. This is usually some sort of enrollment fee ranging from $10 to $25. Usually, those who respond to this advertisement never receive any information after the fees are paid. Lastly, craft assembly is also a scam where perpetrators promise high pay for working on different projects. These projects can include anything from wooden calendars to paper towel holders to hair clips and even holiday decorations. Victims are usually required to purchase costly materials, equipment, and training. The victims are usually required to sign a contract that obligates the victims to purchase more materials and equipment than is needed. Normally, the perpetrators will promise to pay the investor for the goods she produced, but at the end, the perpetrators will almost refuse to pay the investor for the work rendered. Another types of scam is bogus mystery shopping scam. So fraudsters take advantage of many consumers through a scheme known as bogus mystery shopping scam. During this bogus scam, perpetrators promise victims a job that involves strolling through store, enjoy the displays, shopping for merchandise, and then feelings report on the experiences they had. Fraud Fraudsters promise victims compensation range from $10 to $14 per hour, plus the opportunity to keep all products evaluated. Although some mystery shopper advertisements are legitimate, the majority are not. Usually, victims are conned out of application charge. The other scams is telemarketing frauds. Fraudsters set up giant rooms in rented offices where they train salespeople to find and defraud victims. These professional fraudsters move from city to city using different names, calling people in other cities and states in an effort to hinder law enforcement. New recruits are given scripts like the one above and receive specialized training to counter every possible objection. These recruits hoax victims through promises of no-risk investment, secret tips, and incredible rates of return. They are unwary investors lose more than 1 million every hour to the investment fraud promoted over the telephone. The next one is regarding safeguards against telemarketing fraud. This is never a legitimate reason to give social security, credit cards, or other information over the telephone unless you initiate the call. If anyone ever asks for social security number or personal information, you should send a red flag that something is not right. Fraudsters sometimes even act as an government officials or other representative to get these informations. Consumers should only provide these informations when they are actually purchasing something and have initiated the transactions. Make
Okay, next is the fraud in e-commerce. Okay, for the fraud risk in the e-commerce, we have two, which is inside the organization and outside the organization. So for the inside the organization, when the perpetrators gain the computer access behind the firewalls and security checks, they find it much easier to infiltrate the system, steal money and information, and cause the damage. So the perpetrators with the inside access know the control environment, understand the security mechanism, and find ways to bypass the security. And the most common problem is the abuse of power granted to the users. So programmers with the super user access often, removal of programmers access is overlooked when the system go into the production. So based on the survey, one-third of the network administrators admitted to snooping into HR records and custom databases. 88% of the administrators would take the sensitive data if they were fired, and 93% would take the company password. For the first one is the data theft. The first concern of the e-commerce fraud as data has many useful attributes. They can be converted to cash fairly easily. Information is replicable, allowing the perpetrators to simply copy data rather than remove them, leaving the source of data intact. Can be transferred easily and quickly to any location. And the last one, manager lack the technical expertise to prevent and detect the data theft. Okay, next, for the second one is the password. The password selection cannot be fully controlled as it is left to the end user. So the common password can relate to personal information. So the perpetrators may be able to guess the password of their employees. And the social engineering techniques are used by the hackers to gain the access to the password. Hackers can take the information from the blogs, Facebook walls, and other social network sites and use this information to ask victims for just a little more. And the companies may require regular password changes to try to mitigate the risk of password being stolen. However, many employees will merely add a sequential number to the end of their passwords. So the company and websites generally have a certain password requirement, such as minimum character length, uppercase, symbol, and number. Okay, next is sniffing, which is a logging, filtering, and viewing of information that passes along a network line. So the most common method of gathering the information from the unencrypted communications. It is easily done on most networks by the hackers that run freely available applications. So the organization can use the firewalls, spam filters, and antivirus program to prevent the sniffing. However, the employee laptops, tablets, and mobile phone can be at risk when on the business trips and connecting to other networks. Next is the web trapping, which is hackers go to the places such as airports where the business travelers are likely to be and set up the internet access points through their laptop. The access point will appear to be legitimate, for an example, the Auckland Airport Free Wireless, and hackers then use the sniffing techniques to find the password and other data as the traveler browses the internet through the connections. Okay, next is the e-commerce risk outside the organization. So the internet provides a rich medium for the external hackers to gain access to the personal systems, and they have the ability to hack from the across international borders, means that the tracking and prosecuting the hackers is difficult. Okay, for the first one is spyware, which is install monitoring software in addition to the regular that a user downloads or buys. Peer-to-peer music and video sharing applications are the worst spyware offenders, and the most spyware programs monitor user behaviors so that the company can make a profit selling the personal data they collect. And the more advanced spyware can copy financial or other sensitive data from the internal directories and files and send it to the external entities. Okay, the second one is phishing. Phishing involves sending emails or pop-up messages asking for personal information in inventive ways. So the common method is to request victims to update their account details by clicking on a link to a website which appears to be the company's website. And the common targets has been bank customers, TradeMe or eBay customers, even government departments such as IRD. Okay, next is spoofing, which is change the information in email headers or IP addresses. Perpetrators hide their identities by simply changing the information in the header, thus allowing unauthorized access. Okay, next is the falsified identity. So the subtle differences in the internet host names often go unnoticed by the internet users. For an example, .com, .org or .nz can be easily confused but lead to the completely different websites. So if the two similar names are owned by two different entities, one site could mimic the other and trick users into thinking they are dealing with the original website. Okay, next is the database query SQL injection. The hackers send a database command after regular data in an online submission form. For an example, hijacking of users' cookie IDs for unauthorized access. Bust out, which is the perpetrators establish a false website at the low cost. And lastly, email and web visits can be hijacked because subtle difference in internet hostname often go unnoticed by the internet users. For an example, the computer.com and computer.org are different things. Okay, next we move to the preventing fraud in the e-commerce. So in a business settings, reducing pressure and eliminating the rationalization has thus far proved difficult. So the security through obscurity is the tactic that keeping the security holes, encryption algorithms and processes secret in an effort to confuse the attackers. So the experience shows that obscurity only heightens the challenge to a hacker. So for the control environment, one of the best way to prevent fraud in an e-business setting is to focus on the reducing opportunities, usually through the implementation of appropriate internal controls. So the internal controls involve 5 different elements, which are the control environment, risk assessment, control activities or procedures, information and communication, and lastly the monitoring. So for the risk assessment, we need to identify the risk of doing business with the e-business partners, focus on the control environment of the business partners, identify the risks involved in the electronic exchange or information and money. And a specialized branch of risk assessment is the intrusion detection, which is try to gain access to the networks and secure the information and reports their finding to the management. Okay, next we have 5 types of the control activities. For the first one is the adequate separation of duties, proper authorization of transaction and activities, adequate documents and records, physical control over assets and records, and lastly the independent checks on performance. Okay, for the first one, which is the adequate separation of duties, make sure the individuals who authorize the transaction are different from those who actually execute the transaction. So by doing this can prevent the most common fraud in purchasing, which is the kickbacks and bribery. The second one is the proper authorization of transaction and activities. And the most common authorization controls are password, firewalls, digital signatures and certificates. Lastly, the biometrics. So the every transaction must be properly authorized. So the third one is the adequate documents and records, which is the electronic documents such as sale invoice, purchase orders, subsidiary record, sales journals, employee time cards, and checks. So in e-commerce, additional controls must be put in place, and the encryption can protect the confidential and sensitive information from being sniffed and stolen. The fourth one is the physical control over assets and record. They have 3 categories of control that protects the IT equipment, programs, and data files. So the physical controls are used to protect the computer. Okay, for the last one is the independent checks on the performance, which is organizations should always conduct checks on their e-business partners. And to prevent the fraud, we need to understand the management or business partner and what motivates them, which includes 3 items, which are backgrounds, motivation, and decision-making influence must be examined. Okay, next, to detect the e-commerce fraud through the data-driven fraud detection. The first one, endeavor to understand the business or operation of the organization. Next, identify what frauds can occur in the operation. Determine the symptoms that the most likely fraud would generate. Use databases and information system to search for those symptoms. Analyze the results, and lastly, investigate the symptoms to determine if they are being caused by actual fraud or by other factors. Okay, for the data driver method, this method is appropriate when detecting the e-business fraud, and one of the best techniques is use the technology. So fraud investigators who want to specialize in the e-commerce fraud should take several IT or computers, networking and security courses. So that's all from our group. Thanks for watching.